Every Clone Trooper variant Part 1. Clone Troopers, also called the Boys in White. They were strong, smart soldiers made to fight for the Galactic Republic. They were much better than battle droids and made up most of the Republic's army during the war against the Separatists, the Clone Wars, and it spread across the whole galaxy after a long time of peace. The clones were created on a planet called Kamino after a Jedi named Sifo Dyas asked the Kaminoans to build an army to protect the Republic, but after he died, the Sith secretly took over the plan and used it for their own goals. All the clones came from the DNA of Jango Fett, a bounty hunter from Mandalore, but they weren't exact copies. Kaminoans changed their genes to make them more obedient and less likely to think for themselves. They also made them age twice as fast, so they'd grow up and be ready to fight in only 10 years. Most of them looked like Jango, with dark brown eyes, black hair, and tan skin, but some looked a little different because of small gene changes. The clones were first sent into battle on the planet Geonosis, and Kamino gave the Republic 12 huge ships called Acclamators, filled with about 192,000 troops. With the help of the Jedi, the clones beat the Separatist droid army and won the first big fight of the Clone Wars. After that, the war kept growing, and the Republic needed more soldiers, so Kamino kept making clones. At the same time, Count Dooku, who was secretly the Sith Lord Darth Tyrannus, convinced more planets to join the Separatists, so the clones had to fight all across the galaxy. Even though they were made to follow orders, the clones started showing their own personalities pretty fast, just a few weeks into the war actually. But the Kaminoans didn't like this and thought it would hurt their performance. But Jedi Plo Koon believed that it helped them work better as a team, and that would be put to the test soon enough. Because the secret plan of the Sith was that the clones were also supposed to destroy the Jedi, they put a tiny chip called an inhibitor chip inside each clone's brain while they were still growing. The chip was first meant to stop Jedi who went bad, which was Sifo Dyas' original idea. But now the chip was meant to force the clones to follow Order 66, which was the name of the plan to turn against the Jedi and wipe them out. Almost every clone followed the order when it was activated, and if the chip was removed or damaged, it could mess with the clone's mind and make them act dangerously. Some clones stayed loyal to the Republic, like Commander Cody and Captain Rex, while others, like Sergeant Slick, turned against it. After 3 years of non-stop fighting, the Separatists attacked the Republic capital, Coruscant, and kidnapped Palpatine. But this was actually a trick by Darth Sidious, which was Palpatine's secret Sith name, to pull Anakin Skywalker to the dark side and make him his new apprentice. And by then, about 1/3 of the original clone army had already died in battle. Now, some clones were trained to be a bit more advanced, like the ARC Troopers. Short for Advanced Recon Commandos, ARC Troopers were a kind of elite clone trooper in the Republic's army. These guys were picked from regular clones who had proven themselves in battle. If a clone did really well during training or on missions, like Echo and Fives, they might be chosen to become an ARC Trooper. Like most clone troopers, ARC Troopers were about 6 feet tall. They had chest plates with ammo holders on top, and they usually worked as officers, leading other troopers into battle. They were mainly made for sneaky missions like recon, which was spying and scouting, hence the name. They were also skilled fighters, good at hand-to-hand combat, using weapons, surviving in rough places, and carrying out smart plans during war. The ones that were leaders and took on missions that were too dangerous or risky for normal clones got their own special armor, which had more parts and looked different from the regular clone suits. In the early part of the Clone Wars, their armor was also used as a test version for what would later become the Phase 2 armor that all clones wore. During the Clone Wars, ARC Troopers helped train the first group of clone commanders, like Bly and Rex, and a group called the Rancor Battalion had a few well-known ARC Troopers, including Colt, Havoc, Blitz, and Hammer. They were all based in Tipoca City, where they trained and kept an eye out for clone cadets who showed promise, like the ones in Bravo Squad. We first see their skills during the Battle of Munilis, where they helped protect a new fleet for the Republic, and then one of their most important missions came when the Separatists attacked Kamino. ARC Troopers like Rex, Cody, Echo, and Fives fought to defend the cloning facilities. You can also see them in battles all across the galaxy, like on Geonosis, Christophsis, and Umbara. They were almost always on the front lines during these fights. After the Clone Wars ended, the Empire decided they didn't want clones anymore, so they shut down the cloning labs on Kamino and stopped making new clone troopers. That included ARC Troopers too. Some ARC Troopers stayed with the Empire for a little while and helped train the first group of Stormtroopers, but a lot of them didn't like what the Empire was doing, and since a lot of ARC Troopers were more independent and thought for themselves, many of them left, and a few of them became bounty hunters or mercenaries. Others joined the early rebel groups that were fighting back against the Empire, but by the time the Empire fully took over, most of them were either gone, hiding, or working for someone else. While ARC Troopers fought on the front lines, these next troopers were the ones to keep things secure and in order. Shock Troopers, also known as the Coruscant Guard, were clone troopers who mainly worked on Coruscant, the Republic's capital. Capital, and they were easy to spot because of their bright red armor and straightforward attitude. These clones weren't just normal soldiers, they were handpicked to protect important people like senators, guard big buildings, and handle really dangerous situations. They wore regular clone armor with red markings, but later switched to upgraded Phase 2 armor. Their helmets had better radios and filters to help them talk clearly and breathe in tight spaces. And they usually carried DC-15A blaster rifles, but sometimes also used rocket launchers or electrostaffs, especially when dealing with large crowds or riots. They were like the police of the clone army. They patrolled the streets, checked IDs, stopped fights, and arrested people who caused trouble. They were also trained for riot control and even had special gear for that, and some of them only used shields to break up crowds without using blasters. While they mostly stayed on Coruscant, they still sometimes went on missions across the galaxy. They rescued Padme Amidala from Zero the Hutt, helped protect Yoda on Rugosa, and handled big events like the Senate hostage crisis. But they were also sent after clones like Fives and former Jedi like Ahsoka when the Republic thought they were traitors or dangerous. And at the end of the Clone Wars, they followed Order 66 like most of the clone army, and they helped attack the Jedi Temple and went after anyone who still supported the Jedi. And when the Republic became the Empire, some shock troopers stayed on as guards for Palpatine, but like we mentioned, over time, the Empire stopped using clones, so most of them were either retired, forced out, or just disappeared. Now, not all clones were only trained to fight on foot. Some were also trained to fly, like pilot troopers. They were clone troopers trained to fly ships for the Republic. These clones were chosen for their flying skills and were trained to handle all kinds of vehicles, fast starfighters, big transport ships, and even walking tanks like ATTs. And they wore white clone armor with yellow markings, and their helmets were a little different from normal troopers. They had extra gear to help them breathe in space and talk to other pilots as well. Their armor was also a bit lighter so they could move around easier inside ships. Some pilot troopers flew ARC-170 starfighters, V-19 Torrens, or V-Wings, while other piloted bigger ships like LAATI gunships, and they could also hop into ground vehicles if needed. They also often worked closely with Jedi generals and played key roles in missions. We first see them during the Battle of Geonosis, flying LAATI gunships to drop off troops and supplies, and they fought in major battles like on Coruscant, where they flew ARC-170s to help defend the capital. They also took part in other big fights, like with Munilis, where pilots like Red Leader and Gold Squadron flew V-19 Torrens straight into these intense space battles with no hesitation at all. And they also flew in the Mon Cala conflict, helping Jedi like Kit Fisto bring back up to the underwater battle zones. And after the Clone Wars ended, some clone pilots stayed behind and helped train the first Imperial Stormtrooper pilots. But we all know the story by now. The Empire slowly stopped using clones altogether. So yeah, like most other clones, the pilot troopers were eventually pushed out, retired, or just vanished. These next stormtroopers didn't just fight, they made sure everyone stayed alive. Medic troopers. They were clone soldiers trained to treat injuries and save lives during battle. They were part of the Grand Army of the Republic and worked in many units, including the 501st Legion. They were trained to be combat medics who could basically fight and heal at the same time. Their armor mostly looked like the standard clone armor, but had special symbols to show that they were medics, like the logo of the Republic Medical Corps on their shoulders. One well-known medic was Kix, who had light blue armor at first and later wore red markings to show his role. And they always carried medical packs with tools and supplies, and they were trained to treat injuries fast, even in the middle of a fight. They could even ignore orders if it meant saving a life. They showed up in some of the biggest battles of the Clone Wars. Kix helped save Captain Rex after he got shot by a sniper on Seleucami, and when he found out about what the chips and what Fives had learned, Kix let Anakin and Rex know where they can find Fives so they could finally figure out what was really going on. And lots of medic troopers were also there during other missions too, like the Battle of Ringo Vinda and the fighting on Anaxes. And right before Order 66 happened, Kix tried to warn the Jedi about the chips, but before he could, the Separatists captured him and put him into stasis. He was frozen for about 50 years and didn't wake up until long after the war had ended. And as we know, after the Republic became the Empire, the role of clone medics faded away as clones were replaced by human stormtroopers, just like most other clones we mentioned. When it came to leading the clones into battle, no one had more responsibility than the commanders. Clone commanders were the highest ranking clone troopers in the Republic Army, and they usually worked very closely with the Jedi generals. And unlike regular clones, commanders were allowed to make hard choices during battle. They were some of the smartest and most skilled fighters in the Clone Wars. They wore the special armor that showed their rank, usually with gear like shoulder pauldrons, kama skirts, backpacks, or rangefinders. And each commander's armor looked different depending on the unit they led. Their armor also helped them stand out, so regular clones could quickly spot them and know who was in charge and who to take orders from. And most of them used smaller, faster blasters like the DC-17 pistols instead of the big rifles. They were the ones to lead large groups of clones into battle, from around 500 to over 9,000, depending on the unit and the mission itself. And while some commanders stayed back to just give orders, others fought right on the front lines with the Jedi. They were trained in special battle skills like planning attacks, managing supplies and logistics, and spotting enemy traps faster than your average clone. And like we mentioned, they were also allowed and trained to make quick decisions during battles. Some even argued with the Jedi and pushed back if they thought of an order or a plan was the wrong move. And the Jedi often listened because they trusted them and their abilities. One of the most well-known commanders was Commander Cody, also called CC-2224. He led the 212th Attack Battalion and worked directly with Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi. He wore Phase 1 and Phase 2 clone armor with orange markings and a special antenna on his helmet. He also fought in many important battles, but unfortunately, when Order 66 was given, he still followed the order like all clones and tried to kill Obi-Wan Kenobi on Utapau. Another famous commander was Rex, also known as CT-7567. He started as a captain in the 501st Legion, working under Anakin Skywalker, and later, before the Siege of Mandalore, Rex was promoted to commander. He wore armor with blue markings, plus a pauldron and other gear that showed his rank. He also fought in a lot of battles and was respected among other clones. And thankfully, he had this inhibitor chip removed when Order 66 came through. He also survived the war and later helped during the time of the rebellion. We also got Commander Gree, known as CC-1004. He led the 41st Elite Corps. He also served under Jedi Luminara Unduli and Master Yoda. He wore green armor and had a special visor on his helmet. Sadly though, when Order 66 was activated, he tried to kill Yoda, but Yoda sensed the danger and killed him first. And some other commanders served in special groups like the Coruscant Guard, which protected the Republic's capital, like Commander Fox, named CC-1010, who led the Coruscant Guard. He was the one to arrest Ahsoka Tano when she was wrongly accused of bombing the Jedi Temple, and he later worked under Darth Vader. And as I'm sure you can guess, after the Clone Wars ended, many clone commanders were either removed, killed, or forced to work for the new Galactic Empire. But some stayed loyal, and others like Rex went into hiding. These next troopers mostly worked alone, picking off enemies from far away. The clone snipers. They were clone troopers trained to hit targets from far away. Well, obviously. But while all clones were good at shooting, these ones got extra training on Kamino to learn how to stay hidden, stay calm, and take perfect shots. They wore normal clone armor, but in the original Battlefront games, they wore these special colors like dark red or maroon to show that they were snipers, and some wore gear specifically based on the unit they were in. Their helmets helped them to see better and stay in touch with their team, and they carried a DC-15X sniper rifle, which could shoot really far and hit small targets. They also carried backup weapons like DC-15S blasters and sometimes used tools like thermal detonators, recon droids, or auto turrets to help them in battle. These snipers had to be very smart and patient to hit their target, and they were great at sneaking into places without being seen, finding the best spots to shoot from, and keeping their cool even in intense battles. Some of them were even part of elite squads like the Clone Commandos. One popular sniper was Seb from Delta Squad, for example, and he always used a DC-17M rifle with a sniper scope. We first see their skills during the Battle of Geonosis, and then they kept fighting in many battles all across the Clone Wars, like on Kashyyyk and Christophsis. They also were the first to work with the Jedi and clone squads to take out enemies before the rest of the troops moved in. They really were a big help in both space and ground battles, keeping everyone safe by stopping any danger from miles away. But unfortunately, like many other clones, a lot of them followed Order 66. Some of them helped take over the Jedi Temple and went after all Jedi across the galaxy. Some clone snipers stayed in the army for a while after the war, but yeah, just like the other clones, they were slowly pushed out and replaced by regular human soldiers. And then we have the clones that were sent ahead of the main group. Scout troopers. They were clones trained for the sneaky and quiet missions. They basically just scouted ahead of the army, finding enemies and moving through rough places like forests, mountains, and swamps. These clones didn't fight in big open battles like others. They were mainly trained to stay hidden, watch from far away, and report back. So they were usually helpful for planning attacks or spotting traps. They wore lighter armor than regular clones, and this was to help them move faster and stay quiet. Their armor also sometimes had camouflage colors to help them blend into trees or other backgrounds, and their helmets had had big visors so they could see better and even breathe easier in certain places. They also carried extra tools like ropes, food packs, small recon droids, and sometimes grappling hooks. Most of the time, they used EC-17 blaster rifles or just light rifles so they could move faster. These troopers learned how to survive alone in the wild and sneak past enemies without being seen. Some also set traps or called for backup once they found enemy bases. They had to be calm and focused all the time, even when battles were actively going on nearby. Scouts helped in lots of big battles during the Clone Wars. One of the most famous one was the Battle of Kashyyyk, where they worked with Commander Gree and Jedi Masters like Yoda and Luminara Unduli. These guys hid in the trees, watched enemy moves, and helped protect the Wookiees and clone forces. But like most other clones, things changed when Order 66 was given. Many of them followed the order and helped go after the Jedi, including some they had fought beside. After the war, some stayed in the army for a little while, riding speeder bikes and working as scouts for the Empire, but their story still ended the same as others. They were eventually replaced with stormtroopers. And while scout troopers usually found the threats, these next ones demolished them. Clone demolition troopers. They were the clones trained to blow things up. That was their main job. They were experts with bombs and explosives. If something needed to be destroyed, like a bunker, a big wall, or a heavy turret, these guys were the ones to call. And they were also good at getting rid of bombs, not just setting them. They wore normal clone armor, but sometimes had extra gear to help them survive blasts. Their armor could be marked with colors like orange or maroon, and some of them had stronger armor to protect them from the explosions they worked with all the time. They also used special gear like wire cutters, explosive charges, scanners, and sometimes even attachments on their blasters. They always had to be really precise and careful. They quickly learned how to place charges in the perfect spots, disarm bombs without setting them off, and knock down doors, bunkers, or other blockades. And they worked both alone and in small teams, and sometimes they helped engineers or commandos during missions. During the Clone Wars, they fought in a lot of important battles, and some were part of groups like the 81st Demolition Battalion or the 98th Demo Squad. They helped clear the way for regular troopers by destroying enemy defenses or planting bombs during sneak attacks, and sometimes they even boarded enemy ships and blew up the parts from the inside. And yes, when Order 66 happened, they still followed it like most other clones. And yes, their end was the same as the others. Some of them stayed for a little while and helped train new soldiers, but most were kicked out, sent away, or replaced. And then we have the specialists, the clone commandos. These were clones made and trained for the most difficult jobs. Unlike regular troopers, they mostly worked in small squads of 4 or 5 and were trained secretly on Kamino with harder drills and better gear. They handled stealth missions, base takeovers, and rescues, stuff regular clones usually couldn't do. They were like the special forces of the Republic Army. They wore Katarn class armor, which was stronger than standard clone armor. It came with night vision, scanners, and other built-in tools, and their main weapon was the DC-17M interchangeable weapon system, which could turn into a blaster, sniper rifle, or grenade launcher. And they also used vibroblades, thermal detonators, and hacking gear. Clone commandos were smart, calm, and skilled in combat, tech, and survival. They could think for themselves and adapt fast to different situations. Some of them led troopers in battle or went on solo missions behind enemy lines. One of the most well-known teams was Delta Squad, Boss, Fixer, Sev, and Scorch. They were first seen in the game Republic Commando. They also appeared in the Clone Wars, bringing back Jedi from Deveron. And they also fought on Geonosis, Kashyyyk, and they fought against Trandoshans. Another clone commando was Gregor. He was part of Foxtrot Group. Unfortunately, he went missing on Sarish, but still survived even if he lost his memory. And after regaining his memory, he helped droids escape and later fought with Rex and Wolf in Star Wars Rebels. Another team was Clone Force 99, also called the Bad Batch. They were mutated clones with special skills. Hunter handled tracking, Wrecker was the strength, Tech was obviously the technology expert, and Crosshair was our sniper. And later there was Echo, who took care of cybernetic hacking. They wore black armor with red markings and went on the most important missions during the Clone Wars. After Order 66, they didn't follow the Empire. Not only that, but they resisted, fought, and helped save the Jedi. They were probably able to do all of that because of their genetic modifications. And after the war, some clone commandos trained stormtroopers or stayed in service for a while, but others like Gregor and the Bad Batch turned against the Empire.